Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'll hold up the book to you. And we are delighted to have with us Anna Downs. She's going to be talking about her brand new book, Red River Road, and she's holding up the Aussie edition of it, which is quite a bit different design-wise.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I see
Um,
the van. The van is a critical part, isn't it?
Yeah,
We're
it is. And
talking
how
about
beautiful
that.
is that image?
the
It's
Yeah.
West
gorgeous, isn't
Westphalia, it looks like
it?
VW. Um, but
Yeah.
let's see, if you have questions for Anna, go ahead and put them in the comments field, and I'll be happy to ask any questions you might have. Barbara usually brings me on screen towards the end of the hour. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It's really a pleasure to see Anna again. We have this is our third go round. Someday I'm hoping we'll actually get her to Scottsdale, but meantime, we're talking to her to someplace around Sydney. No, you're on
Yeah.
the coast, aren't you?
I'm
Where?
on the Central Coast, yeah, just north of Sydney. It takes me about an hour and 20 drive south to get into the city centre of Sydney. So it's I mean I think we're classed as Greater Sydney. It's one of those things.
Right. Well, Metro Phoenix is. Do
Yeah.
you know that Metro Phoenix is the largest city geographically in the United States?
I did not know that.
Bigger than
You
Los Angeles.
always you always give me interesting facts. You are a wealth of interesting facts.
Well,
I
thank you
always
very
get
much.
something.
So you're up if one were going to drive north towards Brisbane and then on up towards the Great Barrier Reef and all, then you would be going north from Sydney, which I have done years and years ago with my younger daughter, who informed me when she graduated from high school that I had said she could have any trip she wanted. She said she wanted a beach trip. So I'm thinking we're going to the Bahamas or Cozumel or whatever. And nope,
Yeah.
Susan's idea of a beach was to go to the Great Barrier Reef.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
So it was really interesting. And that was a long time ago. And
Yeah.
traveling through rural Australia was like traveling through the American West in the 1950s. There were a lot
Right.
of concrete block motels, and it really was interesting. It was kind of
Yeah.
like going back in time. Has that changed?
I mean, yeah, it would have done, but I think that part of the appeal of writing about those areas is that because the country is so huge and there are just enormous kind of swathes of space that are completely unpopulated and that are still being developed. I think it is like going back in time for a lot of people. It's such a relatively new country. And again, as I say, I can't stress enough how sometimes you go out to a place and it really is still being built. And so for road trips and adventures, particularly in Western Australia towards the north and the Northern Territory, Tim Winton describes Ningaloo, which is a part of Western Australia that comes into play towards the end of Red River Road. Tim Winton describes that as the last wild place on earth, which I kind of co-opted a little bit as a phrase into the book. But I mean, it really is an extraordinary experience traveling anywhere within those areas. But I mean, particularly, the Red Centre, you go up through the centre, I mean, you won't see anything for days, weeks. It's extraordinary. And even I would say the trip that you did from Sydney, Brisbane, Barrier Reef up to Queensland, far north Queensland, there are still some stretches that feel really lonely and uninhabited. I mean, that's largely to do with the distances between them. So yeah, I mean, it would have changed a lot. I think if you were to do that trip now, you'd find some huge differences. But at the same time, it is still very wild in places, extraordinarily so.
And vast tracts of land sort of uninhabited. I mean, is it Ben Stevenson? I'm trying to remember his first
Yeah,
name. Yep. All
yeah,
right. So in his most recent book, he set it on a train that comes down
yeah,
through the center of Australia, and you
yeah.
recognize that there's practically nothing there. Do you know there are cruise lines that are now are now featuring trips that start in Queensland and go west over the top into the, kind of Red Rock Canyon country and all,
Yeah,
veer off into Indonesia and head on
yeah.
to Singapore. So even the last wild place is going to be invaded by tourists.
I, I mean, and that's quite an interesting discussion to throw around, I think, because when I went to see Tim Winton speak about his fantastic documentary called Ningaloo, which is all about exploring the wilds of the Ningaloo Reef, the Cape Range around Exmouth and the Exmouth Gulf. Um, you know, he obviously does touch upon the fact that it is wild because it hasn't been exploded by the tourism industry, but also he said, it is under such threat, that area,
Yeah.
from industrialization. And there he's trying to push through a bunch of legislation about what you can and can't exploit up there. What industrialization is permitted to happen and what's not. And he said one of the best ways of protecting the area is to encourage tourism to those areas, so more and more people are aware of its beauty and they fall in love with it, and then people get more on board. And he said that actually tourism is by far the lesser evil.
That's really interesting. I mean, of course, that a lot of those cruises don't do a lot of landfall.
No.
Or they do, they're like, doing little helicopter trips and other things because there's not
Yeah.
a lot of infrastructure. Anyway, I have not been to Western Australia, to Perth, but my younger daughter has, she and her husband, and just have raved on about how beautiful it is. So you decided to get Red River Road out to
Yeah.
Western Australia. Have you
Yeah.
traveled there yourself? I mean, is this a result of a road trip?
I have now, but the reason that I chose that area was not because I'd already been there. I chose it because the idea for the story came first. And this was in 2021. So we were still in rolling lockdowns. We were still not yet out. And Western Australia actually had its hard borders still in place. So there was no way I was going to get there, for the foreseeable future. But I spoke to some friends who had completed a lap of Australia in a camper van, or with their families with a trailer or whatever. And I said, look, I really want you to help me figure out where this story is set. And I laid out the bones for them. And I said, I need a landscape that changes dramatically as you go along, preferably from the more familiar to the increasingly more kind of hostile or extraordinary or wild. I said I'd like to include ocean, but also sort of desert, lots of different features geographically, and because of the nature of the story and the genre, my friend Lucy said to me, oh God, you've got to set this in Western Australia. It would be perfect. And she kind of suggested a few different areas. When I went to follow up myself and look into these places for research purposes, I just fell in love with the Coral Coast as it appeared to me, digitally and on paper. And I was like, actually, the route itself almost maps a kind of a narrative in the way that it changes. And you can really see those sort of plot points emerging almost, and you can see where a climax would take place. And I just thought, oh, this is perfect. It's so unspoilt, and as we were saying before, it's really extraordinary in terms of it's where the desert meets the sea. And you've got gorges, and you've got these huge long lonely stretches, you've got great surf, you've got working pastoral stations, you've got roadhouses, you've got the lot. But again, the hard borders were still in place. And I thought, oh, I really don't want to be that obnoxious British chick trying to write about Western Australia without having ever been there. They're going to hate me. Fortunately, as I was writing the first draft, I think I was almost done. And the borders opened. So immediately, I booked a flight. I rented a van on Camplify that looked to me to be exactly what I'd imagined that Katie would be driving. And I did that trip, and it was almost better than having done a trip and been inspired by it and then written about it, because I almost like I got to live the story. I lived the itinerary, I tracked the itinerary, and it was the first time that I had written a story and then kind of almost jumped into the pages to fact check. And that was great because it sort of meant that I wasn't tied to too many details. I'd imagined a lot of it, that then traveling there myself brought so many authenticating details, and sometimes even things that I'd written about almost materialized as if I'd manifested them. There was a bit of big magic going on. It was really fun. It was really fun.
I can see that. So where did you start? Did you start in Perth?
Started in Perth, drove up through the northern suburbs of Perth, through the Yanchep National Park. It's a kind of a long, very long itinerary. I've actually got a map in front of me here. So you go through Jurien Bay, where there's sea lions and beautiful white beaches, up through a town. There's a bit of a kind of a pastoral area where you get a lot of farmland. Then there's Geraldton. And it gets increasingly, sort of remote and rural as you go up. As you said, not very much infrastructure. There's a pink lake, literally pink. The water is bubblegum pink due to a particular mineral in the water. And then you go up through Kalbarri, which is where you can go hiking through all these crazy gorges. You've got the Murchison River there, which is, it's just scenery wise, it's like the little Grand Canyon. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of scenery. And then you go up through Shark Bay and Carnarvon, and all of that is really sort of four-wheel drive off-road stuff. Phenomenal untouched scenery up there. And then on to Ningaloo, which, as I said, is words can't really describe it. It's a stupid thing to say given that I've actually written a book about it, but it's an extraordinary part of the world. And I think it's sort of, it really is experienced sensorially, which again is why having been there was such an important part of writing it.
Well, there's no question that some of those landscapes have wonderful, distinctive smells. You find the sagebrush or you drive through this and that here out west. You can, it's a really tangible thing.
It is a tangible thing. And I think it also smell particularly, it's funny you should mention that, because that I do think that's really important in experiencing a place. And it connects so much with your individual experience and your childhood memories and who you are. What you smell brings you back to all these memories, and it affects how you experience a place. It affects what a place does to you. I think it's a really important part of it.
So when you take this trip and you arrive at your destination, what's your move? Do you turn around and go back? Do you?
Yeah.
What's the round trip?
So what we did was, I like in the Red River Road hard copy, there are some maps here that I drew myself.
Gotcha.
And that's the itinerary that I did. So my husband came with me. I didn't do it alone. However, I did do a solo van life trip from Perth down to Margaret River a bit later on.
Gotcha.
But this trip I didn't do alone because it's just so we did the whole thing in about 10 days, and I think it's about, oh my God, 1,200 kilometers there. Like if you did it all in a straight run, it'd be 12 hours up there, 12 hours back again.
Gotcha.
It's
No,
huge.
I understand it. See, I'm handicapped by the fact that the Advanced Reading Company doesn't have any maps.
It doesn't. Oh, well,
No.
we'll have to make sure that Minotaur send you a hard copy so you can see it.
Well, no, I bought hard copies. We have them at the store, but one of the difficulties that I have, as a rule, is that in order to have these conversations, I have to read the book before it's published.
Yeah.
And therefore,
Yeah.
what I generally get is something called an advanced reading copy, which is like a paperback. And because they're expensive, very often things like maps are not included in them.
They're not
They
included.
make it into the finished copy, and occasionally there are actual alterations in the text and whatever.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
that
can be
is true.
talking along based on what I've read, and it turns out
Uh-huh.
what I
Well,
read
hopefully they're not any kind of huge discrepancies there. But no, so the itinerary was such that we drove quite quickly, but stopping off at all the places all the way up. And then once we got to Exmouth, we just basically gunned it back down to Perth.
Sure. No, I totally get it. I would love to go to Perth and go down Margaret River probably, but go up north.
So beautiful.
I'm sure it is. But anyway, the American edition does emphasize, you can see the roadway here. So tell me what hashtag van life actually means, because I have to say that that was not a hashtag that had come my way.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
So, I think I didn't know how, like, where it originated and how long it's sort of been around for, but it certainly exploded, I think, during the pandemic and
Sure.
lockdowns, and people were obviously dreaming about far-flung locations and all kinds of different destinations from behind their lockdown doors, myself included. And in Australia, it is a particularly strong trend. You'll find that if you did that trip, if you did the big lap, you find a lot of families and you find a lot of retirees as well. And also plenty of solo travelers and kind of younger backpackers, but they tend to be your biggest demographics is kind of young backpackers, families, and retirees. And we just found ourselves constantly having this conversation of, oh, why don't we just grab the kids and take them out of school for a year and just get a van and we'll homeschool them for a bit and we'll just travel. I mean, it helps that, as we were saying before, Australia is such a diverse, huge country. So, and the route around as well, the kind of the lap itself is really clearly marked, and there's a lot of sort of almost very obvious stops along the way that everybody hits, and there's all these kind of photographs that you take at every point. So it became this massive trend just within the country. But I think it chimed with this kind of global fetish for it sort of feeds into the tiny home thing as well. What can you do with a van? What kind of interior fit outs can you do? And just so hashtag van life was about who's on the road, what pictures are you taking, what does your van look like, is it beautiful? And then it kind of expanded even more into, it was a very particular kind of person, a kind of travel fluencer, usually with long flowing hair, flowy dresses, a kind of an akubra hat or a kind of fedora. Everybody's very beautiful. The vans are always pristine. There's lots of shots where your feet are kind of in the foreground of a picture and there's, a beautiful background, or like the back of the van is open. There might be a dream catcher in the corner, some kind of crochet wall hanging, and there's like, ocean in the background or a kind of a mountain range or whatever. And I was fascinated by it. I was completely seduced by it. It's so beautiful to look at. Some of the photography is wild, but it became almost like these stock images that you put up because, that was very sort of signaling of the fact that you were living van life. And let me tell you, having done it, the reality is really different. There's a lot of grime, there's a lot of dirt, there's a lot of sweat. The van is really difficult to keep clean. There's a lot of kind of bumpy, corrugated, unsealed roads that you have to navigate. Things go wrong. Sometimes you get stuck in places. Like it's the reality is really different to the hashtag, and that was something that I really wanted to play with in this book, as well as the fact that if you advertise your travels in a particular way and advertise yourself as a particular person on social media and online, it's actually very easy, I think, for people to follow you, which is what they want you to do, you know, follow our travels, but also to almost track you and predict where you're going to go next. You know, if you've got a surfboard and you're traveling along the Coral Coast, there are definitely some certain places that you're going to hit up. If you've got, you know, if you're a kind of a family that loves to fish and you've got the equipment on the back of the van, that's another thing. You're probably going to find these people at XYZ, you know, and the migration is such that you do see the same people at the same stops along the way as well. So that whole thing I thought was really interesting, as well as the community that you find, which is generally, I have to say, very, very warm and beautiful. And again, the fact that you do see people, the same people along the way, means that you make these friends and you kind of rock up at a caravan site or whatever, or a beauty spot, and you'll be like, it's, you know, Nick and Judy, we saw you back at blah blah blah. So I just thought the whole thing was just so packed full of fantastic narrative devices and clues and surprises. So yeah.
It's different than a destination thriller. Destination thrillers have become a thing too, where
Oh yeah.
many of them are kind of a modern version of "And Then There Were None," in that you take
Yeah.
people and you isolate them on an island. Ruth Ware's last book was like that, you know, and some others, and then bad things happen to them.
Yeah.
Whatever. But a road trip is different because, you know, you're not in the destination. You are, in fact, on the move. And because people are putting their whole lives up there, and as you point out, it can be predicted where they're going to land and whatever it is. It's a
Right.
dangerous place, and especially dangerous place, I think, for women traveling alone, but not necessarily even a woman. I mean, there are predators out there. And basically, this can create a real hunting ground, you know, for that kind of person. And if you're in an isolated area, nobody might notice you're missing for a while.
I mean, that's right. Again, just packed full of story potential. I mean, just going back to what you were saying about the difference between those destination thrillers that are very much static, and also I think the trend for Australian noir being set in you know, an outback town, a small town where someone's gone missing and everybody's got secrets. Ben Stevenson and I actually talked about that at one point. I think we were at a festival and we were saying how we both were super keen to do something a bit different where the narrative is always in motion. You know, you're not stuck in one place. It's not static. The story is
Right.
constantly moving and you're anchored to this small confined space, which you know, potentially is your locked room or whatever. But you know, the landscape outside is constantly
Sure.
changing, you're constantly in motion, and people in Red River Road, the characters are actually converging on each other as well. I think with regards to female travel and safety, I had the idea for this story, and this happens a lot with me, is I have an idea and I think it's fantastic. And then I start kind of deep diving on certain subjects, and I realize that my idea was really kind of trite and a bit cliched because it's based on a lot of assumptions. And so what happened is I started going, oh yeah, a road trip thriller. It's going to be fraught with danger. There's going to be loads of predators because there are loads of predators out there, and it is a hunting ground. And you know, we've seen from the movies that there are psychopathic farmers and there are, you know, crazy people in the bush, and you know, we've got to look out for them. And there might even be some ghosts or some haunted parts of the roads or whatever. And then you start looking into the real lived experiences of people, usually women, who have been harmed or killed while traveling. And actually, the threat is not what we think it is, you know? So it really made me think a lot about the responsibilities of storytellers in terms of what myths and legends we're propagating, what dangers we are directing attention to, and what threats we might be smoke screening. You know, what are we kind of hiding or not discussing because it's not as fun or thrilling or sexy as a ghost or a psychopathic farmer, or someone being locked in a pig shed. Like those things do happen. If you go online, you can see those stories, and they are very prominent because they're so wild. But actually the more pedestrian stories of I mean, they're everywhere, of women being harmed while traveling. And as I said, the threat is not what we think it is. So I think that part of Red River Road and the writing of it was my attempt to uh, reconcile those two sort of almost opposing um, ideas, concepts, and to try and write something that is thrilling, is entertaining, is really fun and gripping, and kind of, got to race through those pages, but also something that feels responsible and weighty, and that kind of plays into expectations of, I know what you want from this book, I know what you want to see, and I know what you think is going to happen, but actually I'm going to take you somewhere else, you know?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that the reader's always, going to be not drawn, is going to have a better experience if they're surprised rather
Yeah.
than, anticipating and then the cliche is
Yeah.
delivered. I think, in the Instagrammable world, it seems to be very difficult for some people to distinguish between that world and the real world, that they buy in. I mean, there's a lot of harm been done to teenagers and all because it becomes, real. And the truth is that often the biggest danger for women is not some stranger you meet at a campsite, but rather the person you're with. We had
That's
that
right.
awful case here with Gabby Petito, and her boyfriend. And also I think traveling together in an enclosed space where can bring things to the surface that wouldn't necessarily swim up in that was part of the problem with the pandemic, is that it was so repressive, that many people reacted poorly. They were angry or they were depressed or, and so I if you're willing to photograph your like and put it out there for people to see, you can't be surprised if you get a mixed reaction. You just
Oh,
can't,
absolutely.
But I think a lot of people somehow think, and I see it all the time at the store and other places, somehow other people see that there's this kind of bell of privacy, like a glass bell that closes over them and their phone. So they can
Yeah.
walk down the street and not fall into a manhole. Or we just had a truck driver, if you can believe this, a truck driver going down the highway watching TikTok videos. And he ended up killing, I don't know how many people, of course, because, and I thought, what was he thinking? He's supposed to be driving. He's got a big rig and he's driving, but instead of driving, he's watching TikTok videos. Where is the disconnect there
Oh
between?
my gosh.
I know. I mean, and he killed a lot of people, and now he's gonna, spend his time in prison and the whole bit. But I think somehow it's like, people have their phones on speakerphone, and then they're having intimate conversations in the pharmacy or the grocery store, where we're all forced to listen to this kind of thing. And
Exactly.
I'm not sure why people somehow think, they're married to their phone, but there's a cone of silence or there's a protective shield around them.
Yeah.
And so I think influencers have that same problem. They're so busy creating this beautiful story and monetizing their life
Yes.
and all the rest of it, that I think there may be a false sense of safety that
Oh, I think so. I think
envelops.
so. Yeah, I think that it normalizes that disconnect.
Mhm.
It kind of like you said, there is a barrier that kind of arises between yourself and the real world, online and on the socials. The interactions that you have are, they're not face to face, they're not about reading the room, they're not about kind of reacting to clues that you're getting from somebody's face or someone's behavior. They're not about the wider scope. So I think that the more people are kind of buried in that, and that becomes their normal mode and their little bubble, like you say, they very much then don't they have no awareness of about what's around them. And you know, there are people kind of talking on the phone. See, I still do that. Talking on the phone and giving out their card details, or like, you know, like it's bananas to me. Or, you know, as you said, having very intimate conversations. But I think that going back to what you were saying about the intimate space of a van or a car or a train moving through space is exactly that. Is I mean, I love road trips in fiction generally, for that reason, in that you have this wide open space outside of you. So essentially you're kind of free and in the open, and you can breathe and exhale because, you know, you're kind of you're just out there, and there's, you know, you're not in the city, and it's amazing, but you're really you're in this little bubble at the same time. And as anybody who has done any long car trip with anyone, but particularly parents with small children, you know, you'll know how kind of frantic and fraught and intense the atmosphere inside those vehicles can get. And I'm telling you, when we went on that trip, we would sometimes be driving for 6-7 hours at a time. The road was just dead straight. There was nothing around, landscape barely changed. And I mean, yeah, like not only can it get quite fraught, but you can also start just out of sort of boredom, I guess, or whatever, like start really getting into deep conversations. I mean, I don't think I've got to know anybody as quickly as I have got to know my publicists when we've been on tour. Like, and we're in those cars and we're running around, you know, driving from city to city or from, you know, store to store. And because you're in that small space and it feels safe, you suddenly start telling each other everything. You know, it's extraordinary. So that, yeah, lots of story potential
Sure,
in
that
both of
can
these
happen on
scenarios.
airplanes. There are lots of books that, you know, arise are actually real life stories that arise with two people sitting next to each other on a plane or
Yeah.
whatever, you know, and
Yeah.
there you are. As you say, there's a weird intimacy that arises. But I also think, you know, that I'm not sure that people recognize that privacy as we used to think of it has
Mm.
essentially vanished. I just had a Zoom conference with one of my staff who was working remotely, and she's been watching these events. Okay. And she has given them, you know, like likes, and she's made comments and all. And now she says she's being pursued by people who are picking up that and asking her to if she wants to come to a literary conference. Does she want to be, you know, sign up to join? I can't remember, whatever it is. So in other words, these algorithms are, even as we're speaking, if people are like, I was going to warn people about this, that once you are on any kind of social media and make yourself present, then privacy as you know it went away, and AI is after you, you know. I was really shocked when she told me that. I was
Yeah.
like, see, I don't have any personal social media. I made that decision a
Right.
long time ago. I do the
Yeah. Good for
Institute
you.
for the Bookstore and I do these conversations, but I am not on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, you know, Instagram personally, whatever. So I don't really know how it works. You know, I
Mm.
mean, I just don't, because I decided that I was already too busy
Yeah.
and my
Yeah.
life was already authentic enough for me.
Yeah.
So,
Oh
yeah.
gosh, yeah. I mean, I only do one. I'm kind of the opinion that I'm you know, if I'm gonna, I'll just do one really well, and then I won't, you know, be on anything
Well,
else,
listen, it's a
because my life is too
vocation.
busy as well, and I get really overwhelmed and all of that. But I mean, for me, it I don't really know how it works either. I just know that there is this kind of amorphous thing that is the algorithm that
Sure.
will sort of direct me to different places and will direct other people towards me at its will and whim. Uh, yeah, I don't, it is quite scary. But it's, yeah,
But
story
you
wise,
know, as when
it's
you become a
fantastic.
published author to some degree, you become a public person. And, part of your career actually requires you, to have a presence. I mean, in my case, it's the business. It's not me personally. I mean, who cares about me
Yeah.
personally? But the business is what, requires all of that. We just hired somebody who finally can get us on TikTok. It's a mystery to the rest of us because we're older. We now have Chantal.
I
Yeah.
won't go over to that country. I have got no idea what happens over there.
Well, but but it is a business asset. I mean, it's an intangible asset, and it's difficult to know if there is any direct monetary benefit from all of that. But if you don't do it, that leaves a void. And to be fair, since we're going to be turning 35 as a bookstore next month,
Oh, congratulations.
we have no marketing budget. We do no advertising. We have never
Yeah.
done a paid ad, whatever. And so all of that, whatever it is going on out there, is what makes it work. Some of it's foot
Yeah.
traffic. Scottsdale is a tourist hub. So some of it is just people wandering around Scottsdale, Old Town, and wandering into the bookstore. Some
Yeah,
of
lovely.
it is, customers recommend. I mean, it is impossible to track all the various ways in which, people connect with the bookstore. I don't know how that goes, but it's different in this, like the van life thing, where it's a really tight group. It's a small group, and so there are tensions that arise there that
Yeah.
I think in a compressed space, or in a time when you can't like just get out of the car. I mean, you're stuck in the car. So if you start having a fight with your husband, what are you going to do? Is one of you going to exit out in the middle of nowhere? No. Or are you going to seethe all the way to, or are you going to figure out how to resolve it? I mean,
Exactly.
and I think that's why, like Ben choosing to be on trains, or, Agatha Christie way back, I think that's what makes the narrative work,
Yeah.
gets the pacing, moves it forward. So let's talk about Katie for a minute. We've talked all around her, but we haven't actually talked about Katie. Katie is a young woman who's looking for her sister, who a year earlier, 3 weeks into a solo van trip, such as we've been discussing, has vanished without a trace in the remote, beautiful coastal highway in Western Australia that we have been talking about. No witnesses, no leads, no DNA evidence, no who knows what has happened to Phoebe. And so what is it that Katie decides to do in the hope of finding her sister?
So what Katie wants essentially is to find her sister by retracing her steps. She feels that nobody has yet done that. And even though it's a year on, in her mind, that is the best thing that she could do. She is mentally and emotionally in a very dangerous place. She has not been able to move on from what happened to Phoebe. She feels completely lost and bereft without Phoebe. And she cannot think of anything else to do but to do the same trip using her social media as a map of sorts. Much in the same way that sort of amateur social media detectives followed Gabby Petito's social media in the days immediately following her disappearance. That was quite I certainly did look at that case a fair bit, and I did think it was interesting that she had been recording herself the whole time. And so it wasn't just police on the case, it was sort of the whole world. And eventually the van was found by one of these amateur sleuths. It was captured in a GoPro video that was on YouTube. So, that to me felt very interesting, that somebody now in this day and age, it's not that unreasonable to go, well, if I follow this, and if I track the hashtags, and I try and look up people that might have come into contact with her, and I go and stand in these places, and I can see not just what the person has shown, I can see beyond the frame as well, and I can feel it and I can sense it, and I will be able to understand through experiencing it what might have happened to this person. So that's her goal. When we first meet her, though, she is in a bit of a state of confusion. She's just fled what she believes might have been a dangerous interaction. When we meet her, it's the middle of the night. She's driving along in her van on the highway. She knows she shouldn't be driving at night. She knows it's a dangerous situation, but she feels that what she has just left is an even more dangerous situation. But for some reason, she can't quite remember the details of it. And then she realizes, she sees an empty bottle in the van. She's like, oh yeah, okay, I've been drinking. Yeah. And that is something that she does. And so, it's hard for her because she's alone. She only really has the social media stuff, which is essentially a blog as well, and her own common sense and her own mind to trust. But if she can't always trust her instincts, and she can't always trust herself because she's numbing herself, then what do you do? She's in a bit of a bind.
She is indeed. So if you are in fact trying to locate somebody by using their social media posts, to map them, wouldn't the obvious place to go looking is where the social media posts stop?
Absolutely. So in terms of logistics, it would be very, very difficult to go immediately to where Phoebe's social media posts stop. So logistically, it makes more sense it would make sense anyway for her to start in Perth and head up from there. And it also makes sense to her that she's going to follow and go, she's going to hit all of these places just to get a very, very decent, comprehensive experience of where she might have gone, who she might have seen, who might have seen her, by, again, like putting herself in those pictures, almost like Mary Poppins in a chalk painting kind of thing. Now, where the posts stop is very interesting, and that is her ultimate destination. It is kind of in the middle of nowhere. Phoebe was last seen at a servo just quite near to the Ningaloo Reef, just kind of south of Exmouth. If you have a look on the map, it's pointed out. And that's a really remote area. So I think that in Katie's head, she's thinking, if I can arrive at that spot with an accumulation of knowledge about where she's been, it might give me, rather than just drop into their cold. That's her rationale.
Well, I think that the thought process there is that it's more likely that Phoebe picked up something along the way or attracted somebody than she arrived at just one place and kerblooey. Right. And she can't actually get there without traveling. I mean, it's not a place where she can just fly in. So I think it's an interesting structure, for a story. I worried about her.
Go on, you go.
I worried about Katie drinking and driving is really not a good idea, regardless of the other hazards. You could end up killing yourself or doing self-harm from doing that, regardless of what other hazards you might meet.
That's right. But I mean, and she's a woman wrecked with grief. And I really wanted to present a very kind of complicated character. She has a certain knowledge of what's going to keep her safe, and she is very, very clear about, she has this checklist that's all about the things that she needs to do daily to keep herself safe. And yet, she's doing things like driving at night and drinking and driving. So she is really complicated. She's in a very confused mental state, and she's not always making the right choices. But I think that was part of the fun of writing her
Yeah.
is making sure that every choice felt right and authentic to her. I think that what I tried to do in writing Katie is really prioritize her lived experience, really get inside her skin and figure out where she's coming from. There's a lot of complications that come out along the way, and they do shed a lot of light on why she's behaving the way she's behaving. But I also think that what she's doing with Phoebe as well is prioritizing Phoebe's lived experience, you know, because Phoebe's case has gone cold because they just couldn't find any evidence. But you know, Katie's like, but you didn't know her and we didn't live what she lived through. You can't just go, oh, there's no clues, you know, in this particular spot. Like, she's going, we need to live it. We need to kind of really understand where she trod and what she looked at and how she might have felt and what she smelled and what, you know, what was going on. So I think that is a kind of a nice analogy for what I was trying to do with solo female travel as a concept, is really kind of prioritize and value the lived experiences of these women.
So you have written 3 books, 3 different, sets of characters, 3 different stories. Before we bring Patrick up, I'm going to assume that you are perhaps going to write another book. So
Oh, absolutely. You try and
what
stop
is it
me.
you're worrying about? What is it you're working on? Or actually, given the way publishing is, it takes so long to get a book into production. You may have actually already written your 4th book.
I haven't completely written it. It's very much in the oven, though. I'm not sure quite what I can say about it. I am trying to create something that hits the mark between The White Lotus and The Shining.
That's all
So,
you need to say. That's fine.
yeah, yeah,
Actually,
and I'm gonna
I just wanted people to know that you were writing.
absolutely.
Because one thing I do know is that readers get invested in an author. They're always anxious that this is going to be the last book, or,
Oh no,
or
oh
anxious to
no.
know what the next book is. And so I always try to end these conversations, with that idea that there's something to look forward to
Oh,
besides the
absolutely.
immediate book. So Patrick, come and join us and let us know if there's any comments. This is a funny time of day here, so it may be that more people will be watching it later or in the morning.
Yeah.
Your
Oh,
sound is
Patrick's
up,
muted, I
Patrick.
think.
Oh yeah, I'm muted.
There you
It's
are.
a rookie mistake. I'm not a rookie anymore, but
Oh, it's
let's
okay.
see. Not a lot of questions. Yeah. What, any TV interest in any of the books so far?
Yeah, so The Safe Place has been optioned, and that was optioned a long time ago, and that's actually really moving along. Again, unfortunately, I can't say anything about it at all, but that is moving along really nicely, slowly, as these things tend to do, but that's looking really good. And my film agents just put Red River Road out to market. So we've had some really lovely interest there as well. I'm pretty confident that something will happen with Red River Road. I think it lends itself to the screen quite well. And if if something strange happens and it doesn't get picked up at all, I will write it myself. But yeah, there's a lot of really nice screen interest. I mean, it's always such a bonus, and it's always delightful to talk to other artists and creatives about breathing new life into a particular story. However, it's never a given, and I mean, as you would, I'm sure, know something about this. Like, it just takes so long. The screen industry moves so slowly. It is glacial. So, and you don't really, as an author, have that much control over it. I mean, it sort of depends on what your relationship is with the optioning people, and what role you're taking on. Like, if you're executive producing, or if you have a hand in the screenplay, like, it is different. But generally speaking, I mean, there's an awful lot of waiting. So I tend not to. It's like it's like managing your expectations. I kind of go, well, that's lovely. That's nice that that's bubbling along over there. And Godspeed and fingers crossed and all that. But actually, I tend to kind of try and compartmentalize and
You just need to
mentally.
get on with the books. I think
Exactly.
the advances in photography, zone photography, are such that the scenery in this book would be a very compelling reason for a
Yeah.
TV company, particularly in Australia. And you may not know it, but there is a long series. It's actually in season 13, amazingly enough. It's all set in France and it's called Murder in ... And what they do is they settle each story in some different part of France. They are maximizing the chateau, they're maximizing historical France, they're
Oh,
maximizing everything, and as Rob said, I'm sure it'll go forever because they go from a fishing village to a castle to down to Marseille to Paris, whatever.
that
And
sounds
the stories
amazing.
don't even matter that much because really it's about France. And what makes it is the absolutely astonishing photography that they can now do, using
Yeah.
sounds. And so when I read your book, I thought this would be a great visual. This book would be phenomenal, in
Yeah.
terms of that kind of photography. So I won't be surprised if somebody doesn't, want to do that. Even the
Oh,
Australian Tourist Board. I mean, seriously,
yeah.
so because
Yeah, I
I'm
think it would
sure.
be, and I get a lot of readers, reader responses going, oh, that's really put me off doing a van life trip in Australia. But I think that there's a lot in there that actually promotes it. I mean, I certainly feel like, uh, in part, the book is a love letter to travel and a kind of a call to women everywhere to do that and to claim your freedom and to get out there. I mean, I'm not arguing for a second that there's no threats at all. I wouldn't dream of doing that. But it is about kind of just reevaluating how those threats come about and where they really lie. And that we as women have as much right as anybody to move through the world without threat or harassment. And that kind of lowering that threat involves a lot of kind of group thinking, from humanity as a collective. We've got to really kind of have a look at the stories and the narratives that we put out there and what we tell ourselves and what we tell women. So
Well put. Anything else, Patrick? That pretty
Um,
much it?
let's see. We have a couple of people that kind of late to the stream. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up?
okay, it's cute. Yeah, so I was born in Sheffield in North Yorkshire. My accent's a bit kind of round the houses because grew up in Sheffield, spent time in Manchester. I studied in Manchester and then I did 7 years in London. I did a stint in the States. I was an exchange student at the University of Illinois and the Urbana-Champaign campus in the cornfields. Shout out to all the Fighting Illini. And then I spent 2 years in France, and now I live in Australia. So, and I've lived in Australia now for 13 years. So, yeah, quite nomadic and have kind of hopped around the country a fair bit. My mother's family are from North London, and my dad's family are all from Derbyshire, sort of, the Peak District and all of that
Beautiful.
area. Yeah, yeah. So I
What
grew up
took you
kind
to
of
Aus
running around the heather and the cliffs
What
of
took
the
you to
Peak District.
Australia?
Oh, what takes everybody to Australia, really? I fell in love with a boy. I married a man, and yeah, I think at the time when we met, I was sort of late 20s, and we lived in France together. We did a lot of travel in Europe and Central America. We did some diving in Egypt, and we backpacked around Ireland and stuff, and then his European visa ran out and I was still young enough to get the Australian sort of tourist working holiday visa, I think it was called. So it was more of just like a decision to just keep going and to keep traveling and exploring. I was an actor a long time ago, and at that point, the sort of impermanence and instability of that particular lifestyle and the kind of, the jolting, sporadic flow of income was all a bit stressful, and so I'd taken a bit of a break, and I met my husband while we were doing a ski season. Like, we both kind of pitched up on this snowy mountain together, and it was just a decision of, I just want to keep going. I don't want to go back to London and to that tiny little flat and to my, kind of watching the phone all the time. And so we just ended up in Australia. And then one day I woke up and I had 2 kids under 2 and a mortgage and a husband. And I was like, I think I might live here now. So, yeah, it was much more of a sort of rolling organic decision than anything that was really well thought through, to be honest, but hey ho.
Well, many people are nomadic and then end up somewhere. Being nomadic is more a young person's game than an older person's game. And very
Well,
happy.
you say that, but there are lots and lots of what we call grey nomads over here who
Well,
sell up and you get in
I'm not
vans and
saying that, but it's hard. It's hard with children,
oh yeah, it is.
and that's
Yeah,
what
I
I
agree with
mean.
that.
That there's a period that's true of reading. I mean, there have been studies that show that children read, and then they go to college, or they get caught up in their studies, and then they have to start their professional life, and then maybe they get married and they have kids, and so it's sort of like in their late 30s or 40s they come back to reading because they haven't had time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think that that's a pattern that shows up in a number of ways. Travel
Yeah,
being um
yeah,
and the difference, I think, during the pandemic and the fact that you could homeschool your children meant that many people did a lot of traveling that without that
yeah.
probably would not have pulled their children out of school and gone and done stuff, so
Yeah,
it was a real
couldn't
game
agree more.
changer. Yeah, a huge game changer for an awful lot of people. I was too old to care, but it works out for, yeah, there we go. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been wonderful to talk to you. So
It's always lovely to talk to you guys. Thank
thank
you
you
so
very
much for
much.
having me
And
on.
should you decide to pitch up in the US, come and see us.
Barbara, I'm gonna make you a little promise here. I reckon next book I'm coming out.
Well, that would be great. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
we are closer to you coming from Australia than, if we were on the East Coast. It's very easy. There are nonstop flights all over the
that's
place.
right. That's all right. But it's fine. Maybe I'll get in a van and I'll do the drive through
You're going to
the whole
drive to,
country.
I'd love to see
Yes.
that. Right. Put the van on the plane, drive it from Los Angeles to Phoenix.
Yeah, yeah. Anything could happen. Anything
I
could
love
happen.
it. That would be absolutely great. Anyway,
Yeah,
thank you very much. It's almost lunchtime where you are, so go and enjoy.
that's right,
And
I
as
will.
Patrick is pointing out, we do have finished copies now of Red River Road. I think it publishes today, actually. Isn't today published? Tomorrow
It's,
for you, but
it's
here
my book
it's
launch.
actually publication day. Right. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Thank
Take
you so
care.
much, guys. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks,
Thank
Barbara.
you.
Lots of love.
It was a pleasure.